Year Sixes, this is Miss Davis from St Patrick's. I'm one of the English teachers, and you might have seen me recently as part of the Noisy Club coming into various different primary schools as you've been taking part in those Noisy Club sessions. I'm here today to introduce the Summer Satchel and introduce the creative writing competition that we'd like you to get involved in over summer so that you can hit the ground running when you come to us in September. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a bit of a competition between the Year Sixes who will be arriving to St Patrick's with us in September. So I thought I'd go over some of the key details for what this Summer Satchel and creative writing competition is all about. Okay, the main things it's about is you getting to explore and show off all of the skills that you've been learning in primary school. So showing off that amazing vocabulary, all of the skills that you've learned in the lead up to your SAT, and kind of really showing us what you're made of before you even get here. So what the competition is. So at St Patrick's, we have a creative writing club, which takes place once a week after school. And it's a really, really exciting club to take part in. So we want you to get involved with the creative writing club and participate in the summer challenge competition. We're asking our Year 6 students to submit a 150-word story, and with the best entries are going to be published on our school website, as well as getting a little prize for all of your hard work. So what the competition is it's a 150-word story. You can't write any more than 150 words. The topic is going to be a horror story, and the deadline is the 9th of September. And that is the end of your first week at high school. So you're going to have more than enough time to come and find me and hand me your stories. And the reason why is that we put the deadline that early is because it gives us enough time to read through them, so that winners can be picked and the stories be published on the website just in time for Halloween and leading up to those spooky sort of things that we might be doing in our English lessons towards that time, okay? And it's open to any Year 6 student who wants to get involved. So the details, 150 words maximum, and it's a word limit. You can't go over that 150 words. What we need you to include is your name, obviously, so we know who to reward, as well as the primary school that you have come from. So that needs to be on the document. You can either handwrite it or it can be done on the computer, but it will need to be printed off. And it needs to be handed to me no later than the end of the day on the 9th of September. Now, if you don't have me as an English teacher or you're not sure where to find me, when you're in school, you'll always be able to pass it on to your form teacher, and they'll know exactly who I am to be able to pass it on to me for you if you're a bit unsure. So, how can you improve your chances of making it onto the published website for your story? So 150 words might actually sound like a lot, but on the last slide, there were already 80 words on there. So we need to be very clever with our language and our story. So what are the types of things that you should not include to make sure that you don't go over that 150 word limit? You don't need more than one main character. So all you really need is the person whose point of view the story is coming from. It might be first person, where you write I, or it could be third person, where you're doing he, she, or they. You don't need more than one main setting. If you've got too many locations, you're not going to be able to describe them in enough detail in 150 words. So picking one location is the key to this. And you don't need lots and lots of events in this story. We're interested in your ability to describe. So the ways that you can make it creepy is looking at this really short story here, and this is the world's shortest horror story. The last man on earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock at the door. Now, if we think about what that makes that creepy is, it makes us feel uncomfortable. And feeling uncomfortable is a really, really good way to write horror stories. So you want to start thinking about, how can I make my audience, how can I make my reader feel a bit uncomfortable? What types of things might make me uncomfortable? And that might be something I could write about. So things like darkness, things like you're unsure of what's going on, or you can hear a noise but you can't see a reason for it. All of those things would make someone feel quite uncomfortable. So here are my top tips to help get you through and published as our competition winners. I'm going to go over some top tips, and I'm going to go over some skills that you might need so you can practice it before you start submitting any competition entries. So, like I've already said, you should tap into some common fears. The most important part of any horror story is naturally going to be its fear factor. So thinking about things that everybody might find a bit scary or unpleasant. You need to strike the right atmosphere, okay? So you don't want to go too over the top with it, but you need to make it scary enough that people are feeling worried. Make the stakes obvious. And what I mean by that is what will happen if your main character doesn't do something, or if the villain catches up with them? What are the things that are at stake if they don't escape from their situation? Carefully consider your point of view as well. So do you want to write it as if it's first person, or do you want to write it as if you are a narrator describing what is happening to a character using third person? And do you want to create a twist or not have a twist at all? Now, I'm going to warn people off from having it was all a dream twist. We don't use that in high school, okay? So if that was going to be your twist, get rid of it. It's not original enough. We want you to start challenging yourself if you're going to include a twist. So, where to start then? I would always recommend trying to figure out where you want your location to be. So start in the scene where your character is going to be. Place your main character in a scene where they're in distress or they're unsettled or uncomfortable in some way. This will introduce the horror element of the story right away because we don't have a lot of words. We need to hit the ground running. So, for example, you might open your story with a scene where your main character is lost in an unpleasant place, maybe a dark forest, for example. So what you need to do first is, before you start anything, you should figure out your character and your setting. So these might be some creepy settings which would be useful. So an abandoned school corridor, a wood in the fog and the mist that you can't quite see what's around the corner, or maybe even an abandoned theme park. So some of the key skills that we're going to have a look at in this satchel and for you to practice with are the following 5 things: adjectives and adverbs, interesting sentence openers, similes, metaphors and personification, and accurate punctuation and paragraphs. These are the 5 things that we want to see you showing off in your competition entry. So, key skills then, thinking about adjectives and adverbs. So an adjective, as you already know, an adjective is a describing word and they're used to describe nouns. So for example, the mournful wind echoed through the ancient trees. Mournful and ancient are our adjectives there because it's describing the wind and the trees. Adverbs do a similar job, but they describe a verb and they typically end in ly. The mournful wind echoed loudly through the ancient trees. Okay, so we're talking about describing how the wind is echoing, and we're saying that it echoed loudly, which is our adverb. So, your first little activity that I would like you to do is I'd like you to have a think about these adjectives, okay? So remember, they're the describing words. I'm going to ask you to identify the adjectives within these 3 sentences below, and then I'm going to ask you to create your own 3 sentences with impressive adjectives that you could use in your own horror story. So, we've got these 3 sentences. The gloomy wind raced through the deserted graveyard. Without any notice, the cracked window smashed into hundreds of tiny pieces. Despite my fear, I crept towards the creaking door of the abandoned house. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to pause the video whilst you identify the adjectives in my 3 sentences, and when you write your own 3 sentences with some impressive adjectives. So while you're doing those 2 small tasks, please now pause this video. Okay, so hopefully you had a go at identifying my adjectives as well as having a go at writing some of your own. So you should have identified gloomy, deserted, cracked, tiny, creaking, and abandoned as my adjectives in my sentences. So congratulations and well done if you managed to get those ones, and well done if you've had a go at writing some of your own. Moving on to adverbs, so again, just a reminder that they describe a verb and they typically end in ly. So what I would like you to do in a similar way, you're going to identify the adverbs in my 3 sentences, and then I'd like you to write 3 sentences of your own with adventurous adverbs. You might even just want to improve the sentences you've already written by including an adverb in there. So my sentences are: the gloomy wind raced unpredictably through the deserted graveyard. Without any notice, the cracked windows angrily smashed into hundreds of tiny pieces. Despite my fear, I crept towards the creaking door of the abandoned house fearfully. So again, pause this video while you identify my adverbs and have a go at either improving your sentences from the last task or writing 3 brand new sentences with adverbs. So pause this video here. Okay, so these are my adverbs that you should have spotted. Okay, we've got unpredictably, angrily, and fearfully. Now, what you might notice is that those adverbs are all in different places. Okay, so if we have a look here, we need to try and identify the verb. So the verb in the first one, the gloomy wind raced unpredictably through the deserted graveyard. Raced is our verb, and our adverb has come after it. So you can put adverbs after the verb. In our second one, the verb is smashed, and I've put the adverb at the beginning of it. So we can either have the adverb before the verb, like angrily smashed, or after the verb, like raced unpredictably. There's also a third place where we can have an adverb, and that's at the very end of the sentence. Okay, so here we've got the verb being crept, because you are creeping towards the door, and it's describing how you're doing that fearfully, and it's at the end of the sentence. We can also put adverbs at the very beginning of the sentence. So if you want to have a look at the first one, we could put the word unpredictably right at the beginning. We would have to put a comma afterwards, but see how it would still make sense. So, unpredictably, comma, the gloomy wind raced through the deserted graveyard. So there's 4 places for adverbs. At the very beginning of the sentence with a comma after it, before the verb, after the verb, or right at the end of the sentence with a comma before it. Okay, what you might want to do is you might want to pause the video here and maybe move the adverbs around in the sentences that you've just practiced with and see where you like them best, because if you're putting them all in the same place, we want to try and create a bit of variety. So there's a mini bonus task there if you would like to pause the video now. Okay, so moving on to our second key skill of interesting sentence openers. Sentences can get really boring really quickly if they start off in the same way, so always starting with I or the. So there's lots of different ways to start sentences which allow you to show off your skills, which is what we want you to do in this competition. Here's 3 of my favourite ways to start off different sentences so that we avoid using I or the. We can use an ly adverb and a comma, like I've just explained in our adverbs section. So for example, unsteadily, the lanky, unkempt fellow slinked down the alleyway. We could use 2 adjectives and a comma, another skill that we've already looked at. Terrified and alone, comma, the girl darted out of the path of her pursuer. Or we could use a verb and a comma. Ambling along the canal path, the boy never even spotted the large shadow following him. So we've got 3 different types of sentences there. An ly adverb starter, 2 adjective starter, and a verb starter. And it just varies our sentences to make them nice and interesting. In this skill, I would like you to have a go at doing the same type of thing. So can you have a go at starting off 3 sentences? 1 with an adverb, 1 with an adjective, and then 1 with a verb and a comma at the beginning. And I've left my examples up there so you've got something to try and aim for. You might want to edit the ones that you've been doing on the last few tasks, or you might want to make some brand new ones. But if you would like to pause the video here while you have a go at the sentence opener task. Okay, moving on to skill number 3, similes. Now, similes compare 2 things using as or like. So, for example, the lightning illuminated the lake, making it look like a sheet of fire. So I'm comparing the lake to a sheet of fire, okay? And similes are excellent ways of getting a clear image into our readers' minds, which is so important in our descriptive writing. And it allows them to picture the location or character more clearly in their heads, which is exactly what we want when we're describing something. So, what we're going to be doing is I've used these pictures from earlier on in the presentation. I would like you to have a go at writing 2 similes that might be useful for your story, okay? Again, you can edit and adapt the ones that we've already been writing as part of this presentation and part of this module, or you can do brand new ones. But if you would like to pause the video here while you have a go at writing 2 similes that might be useful for your story, or that are based on some of these pictures here. So pause the video now. Okay, moving on to metaphors and personification. These are slightly more complicated skills than similes. Metaphors In a similar way to similes, they compare two things, but metaphors are doing it as if those two things are the same thing. So, for example, the house was a prison of horrors. Now, the house cannot be a prison of horrors. We're comparing two things as if they are the same thing. Personification is when we give an inanimate object human features, qualities, or emotions. So, for example, the branches of the tree reached out with their arthritic fingers and grabbed me. So a tree can't reach out because they aren't capable of thought, so they can't think to do something like that. Arthritic fingers are when someone's fingers are a bit like a witch's fingers and they're all gnarled and horrible. And grabbing, again, that's a human action, okay? So I'm comparing a tree to a human, okay, to try and make it seem more sinister and scary. So although these are two more difficult skills, they're often very, very effective and impressive when you can use them. So what I would like you to do in a similar way to the similes task that you've just done is use some metaphors and personification. So again, using these pictures for a bit of inspiration, can you write me 2 metaphors and 2 personifications that could be useful for your story? Again, you can edit and adapt some of the sentences you've already done during this session, or you could even change some of your similes into metaphors by trying to get rid of the like and as and see if it still makes sense. So if you'd like to pause the video here whilst you are doing this task. And finally, our final key skill is accurate punctuation and paragraphs. Now, accuracy is something that is very, very important. It's a really important skill to check over your work and ensure that you've not made any mistakes. This is what we say to all of our students. Make sure you've not made any silly mistakes that would be easily corrected. So we always recommend from year 7 to year 11 that students check their punctuation, especially for full stop, comma, or even capital letter errors, because we shouldn't be making any mistakes on those 3. We ask them to see if they can prove any of their work, either by using a thesaurus for their vocabulary to improve that to a higher level and be more sophisticated and more impressive, or by trying to add in some more complex punctuation like semicolons, which you will have learned about in year 6 to prepare for your SPAG tests towards the end of the year. So if you can get some of those more complicated pieces of punctuation in, it looks really impressive. You also need to ensure that your paragraphs are accurate too. So making sure that you are using them at the appropriate time. So if you are changing topic or person or time or place, you should be starting a new paragraph. So this slide, we don't have any activities to do, but this will be a useful slide for you to go over your writing before you submit it to me to make sure that you've not made any of these mistakes. So good luck with this competition. I am really excited to read some of the stories that you are going to be writing over the summer holidays. Just a reminder, 150 words, the topic is horror. The deadline is the Friday when you are at the end of your first week of high school. Any year 6 student can participate this. You need to make sure your name and your primary school is written on your sheet of paper before you hand it in to me. It can be handwritten or it can be done on the computer, but it must be printed off and it's going to be handed to me, or if you can't find me or not sure who I am when you get here, then just pass it on to your form teachers and they will pass it on to me. Don't forget to keep looking back at this satchel because it might be useful to go over some of the skills before you submit your essay. And a lot of the work that you have done in this satchel unit will be really, really helpful as you plan and write your horror story. So good luck, and I'm really looking forward to seeing these stories later on this year.